Hello everyone. I should probably introduce myself. My name is Joseph and I'm from Utah, but I live in Texas right now. And you've been watching my shorts about science, and I really want to say thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for leaving likes and comments. It really helps my channel to grow. So I want to tell you about myself. Who am I? Why am I teaching science? Well, technically, I'm not a scientist. I didn't graduate with a degree in science. I went to school for engineering for a while, but I didn't finish that either. So really, if you're going to believe anything I say, you should do it solely based on the merit of what I have to say. I first started thinking about science when I was a teenager. So I was homeschooled, and I didn't have a lot of social interaction with my peers. And there was this textbook. It was a science book, and it kind of had a religious bent to it. And I fell in love with science and with physics in particular when I was very young. So I just remember that when I was 12, I invented a fairly elaborate perpetual motion machine with magnets and a suspended rod. And it wasn't until I went to college later on and I was taking a class on thermodynamics, an engineering class, that I realized, okay, that's why this won't work. But I have obsessed over science for so long, and I've noticed inconsistencies along the way. Actually, I probably would have gone into physics in college, except that I was so disturbed by some of the things that I was hearing from people who claim to be scientists. There are so many of these things that don't feel right. Like, for example, we'll just say parallel universes. And, is the cat dead or alive? Schrodinger's cat in a box. And I know that there's, that can be interpreted many different ways. There are many other things, like people talking about warp drives and white holes and wormholes and string theory. Hey guys, none of these things really sat very well with me, and I made this decision actually that I wasn't going to study physics in college from physicists. I wanted to learn it from engineers, and the reason why is because I didn't trust the physicists. So physics is my passion, but I don't trust the physicist. And so I went on and I started studying engineering, mechanical engineering. And I was taking a class on electromagnetism, and the professor had kind of his own theory, his own conceptual model for electromagnetism, and his name was Dr. Rees at Brigham Young University in Utah. And I'm sure he doesn't know who I am. He was a very busy professor, and I did not get to know him. But inside his class, I realized for the first time in a profound way that scientists are kind of grasping at straws for certain things. There's a powerful understanding out there which enables powerful technology, but as far as understanding the fundamental principles of nature, scientists they're having a lot of trouble. And so it was in that moment that I started, during that class, that I started in earnest to develop my own theories, to try and figure out for myself. I was like, well, if nobody else understands, then maybe I should take a shot at it. Not that I'm special, not that someone else couldn't do it, but just that no one else has done it, and no one seems to have the intuition that it should be done. No one can see the inconsistencies that I can see so plainly. So, I have this brother who studies math, and he's a mathematician. He's a PhD, and so he's always talking about math growing up. He would come to the family parties with a math book when he was a teenager. And he was always talking about axioms and how important they were, and about assumptions. And he was always one for an argument. It's like, well, I'm going to prove it, with logic. And so I thought about logic, and I realized that if I was going to develop, so this is just background, but I realized when I was in Dr. Reese's class that if I was going to create my own theory, then I would have to go back to the beginning. I'd have to figure out, okay, what are the assumptions that are kind of like at the base of everything? You can build a theory based on any old axiom, but is it the right axiom? How good is the axiom? Is the axiom better than the ones that we're already using? And so this is how you have to go about building a theory. And then you build it out, and it takes a long time. And if it's successful, it will have all of the predictive power of the old theory, but then it will have a whole bunch of new predictive power as well. This is a tall, tall order. And the reason why is that science is so advanced. The theories that we have they're incredible. You can do so much with them. The problem is that they're not always intuitive, and it's like a patchwork of smaller theories, and all of those smaller theories aren't built on the same axioms. There's some discontinuity between the theories. Like the one everyone always talks about is the difference between general relativity and quantum mechanics. There's a lot of discontinuity there. So here I am, and I'm thinking about, okay, well, what are the fundamentals here? What would you build this theory on? And I decided that the most fundamental concepts were space and energy. So I figured out that all matter is made out of energy, and there are no fundamental particles. Well, there are fundamental particles, but more fundamental than the particles is the energy the particles are composed of. And it's really a kind of a bizarre thing too, because you have a little bit of energy, and you can create a particle, and a little bit more energy, and you can set that particle in motion. You add some more energy, maybe you can cause that particle to emit a photon. And so energy really is the essence of everything, but so is space. Space is too. And so I remember one time I was actually, so I was a part of the Mormon Church, or they like to call it the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But at the time I was going to BYU, and I was Mormon. And I was thinking about this while I was in church one Sunday. And church for me was on BYU campus, and it was inside the Tanner building. Well, it was the business building. I hope I got the name right. Big, tall, granite-looking building with big windows on BYU campus. And we were having our church meeting, and I was thinking about science. I was distracted, and it dawned on me during this meeting. I had this epiphany that the thing that was fundamental in all of nature is actually space. That space is more fundamental than matter, and it's more fundamental than energy. That space is at the root of everything, and that space is actually not just an empty box where something can reside. You can put something, but it's actually an object. Space is actually it's a mechanical object that can be quite literally compressed or expanded or twisted. I'm talking about local deformations in this object of space. And there's this analogy that I like to use to explain it to other people, and that is that imagine there's a pond, and this pond, it stretches off to infinity, And let's say the pond has no edges whatsoever. But inside this pond, there's a ripple. This is not any ordinary ripple. This is an intelligent ripple. And the ripple looks off across the pond. And what does the ripple see? Well, I would argue that the ripple sees nothing. The ripple just sees empty space. The ripple sees a whole bunch of places where it could be, or where something else could be. So only when you introduce a second ripple, then the first ripple can say, oh wow, I see something. There is something occupying that space over there. And this is our relationship with space. You know, we think space is just a place where we can be, but really it's not. It's so much more than that. So we are energy on the medium of space. So energy is essentially any kind of deformation or motion of space. Like I'm talking about local, internal deformations and motions. So like a compression, for example, if you were to take a little bit of space and you were to compress it, then something really interesting would happen. Because you've compressed a little region of space, then the space around it is going to be stretched out because, well, let's just say space is like a grid. It's you know, it has a relaxed state where there are no forces on it. And if you compress one area of it, then you expand the surrounding area. And also you bend the natural grid lines of space. So there's bending and twisting. And so this right here is actually analogous to electromagnetism, which is incredible. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I was inside this church meeting and I had this idea that, wow, space is actually the real thing. And it just blew my mind. I was like overcome with like just this feeling of I discovered something so important, and really, like, I have spent probably I don't know, thousands and thousands upon thousands of hours thinking about this and trying to build off of this. So my approach to building a theory is that I would start from the most fundamental principles that I could think of. So space and energy. And from there, I would try and build up on that. If I had the axioms right, and if I was very careful with all of my assumptions going forward, then I could expect to produce a theory that was, you know, if the axioms were correct, then the theory would be true, or would at least be closer to being true. So this is my journey. And so I was at BYU and I was going through my engineering classes, and I was just doing my coursework, and at the same time I was working on my theory. And I had this conversation with one of my buddies. I was telling him something that I discovered, and he was like, dude, the rest of us are just trying to pass our classes, and you're out there like trying to make these big discoveries. I was like, well, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And it was a heavy workload intellectually. It was very heavy. And there were some other things that happened. I was engaged to someone at the time, and it didn't work out. And this took a very, very heavy toll on me. And I was not able to finish school. I ended up dropping out after I had completed the whole engineering, math, and science core, but without a degree. So I continued studying science beyond that. So I was, just looking up online, Wikipedia, listening to people who were in the field talk about it. And the part that I was most interested in was the conceptual part. Math is important, but really the math just describes how all the concepts work together. it adds specificity to the theory. But the concepts themselves, in my opinion, are the meat of the theory, because the concepts tell you very directly what is happening in nature. So I was a concept specialist, and I've always been trying to figure out how all of this like fits together. And I've come a long way. I figured out what electromagnetism is. So back to compressions, expansions, and twisting. So these things are positive and negative charge and magnetism. There's a very, very strong case for this. But also, gravity is so gravity is what happens when there is energy. There's an energy footprint in space. Okay, so I need to back up just a little bit. So a particle is kind of like a whirlpool in a bathtub. It's mostly local, that is right above the drain, but the whirlpool tapers off all the way across the bathtub. And so where's the particle? Well, it's a little bit everywhere, mostly over the drain, but a little bit everywhere else. And so this is actually more analogous to charge, for example, like a positive charge or a negative charge will have this footprint. But let's say you cancel out all of the charges. So like the Earth is essentially made up of countless positive and negative charges. And these charges are essentially all canceled out. If they weren't, the Earth would just fly apart because the forces would be so great. So these charges are canceled out, but nothing cancels perfectly. There's still some energy left over, some imperfections in the cancellations, and these imperfections also taper off to infinity. And let's say there's another particle that exists inside of this energy footprint. Well, that particle will actually have slightly different properties because there's already energy there where it's trying to exist. So this particle will be a little bit larger, actually, because there's already an energy footprint there. So its own energy footprint will be slightly larger to compensate for that. And this is how gravity works. Gravity works because particles want to be bigger, the bigger the energy footprint. And so it's kind of like bubbles inside of your fish tank. Bubbles rise in your fish tank, and as they rise, they get bigger. And it's the same thing with particles falling towards the Earth. The particle gets ever so slightly bigger as it falls. And there's a little bit more to it than that. But essentially, the particles rise to the surface of the Earth. They fall to the surface of the Earth, but you know what I mean. And physicists are always talking about, wow, gravity. Gravity is such a weak force. It's so weak. Why is it so much weaker than all of the other forces? And the reason why gravity is so weak is because the effect is so small. So a particle up at the International Space Station would be a few billionths smaller than a particle on the surface of the Earth. So the difference is minute. And, you know, we don't really think about, most people don't think about gravity as being all that weak, but it really is. And I can explain to you why that's the case sometime in the future. But really, all of the bonds that make up our bodies, all of those are very weak bonds as well. Everything on the Earth is made up of very, very weak bonds and weak forces. And this is if you contrast it with all of the forces that exist in nature and how strong they can be. They just scale so high. Anyways, I think this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to wrap it up. But For those of you who have commented and liked my videos, thank you so much. This is a passion of mine. It's gone on for a long time. Quite frankly, I've decided to slow down. I've decided to stop trying to figure stuff out for the time being and just try and explain some of the things that I've already learned, some of the things that I've come to understand. And I guess the feeling for that is, the reason is that it's hard. It's hard to come up with these new ideas, and especially if you think that somebody may never know about these ideas that you've come up with in the future. So really what I need to do is I just need to start channeling some of this onto other people, other curious people who are interested in how science works. That's going to take a while for these things to catch on, but I'm positive that it will eventually catch on, because these things are all very, very fundamental. Anyways, that's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again probably in the next short.